Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The big question hanging over the reconstruction is this: who is Puerto Rico for? Is it for Puerto Ricans, or is it for outside investors and tourists? And after a collective trauma like Hurricane Maria, who has the right to make these fateful decisions?
As a new hurricane season begins in Puerto Rico, we'll spend the hour looking at the future of the island, following last year's devastating storm. Just last week, a Harvard study put the death toll at 4,645, 70 times higher than the official count. We will speak to Naomi Klein, author of the new book, The Battle for Paradise, Puerto Rico Takes on the Disaster Capitalists, as well as Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance, and Puerto Rican environmental activist Katia Aviles-Vasquez.
A lot of conventional farmers right now are starving. Even though they have amazing amount of land, they didn't have anything to harvest because they had followed the Department of Agriculture's instructions for monocultures of coffee, whereas before, traditional agricultural farm would be intercropped with oranges, with bananas, with plantains, and that provides for your family.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Voters headed to the polls yesterday for primaries in Alabama, California, Iowa, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, and South Dakota. In California, Democratic Lieutenant Governor and former San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom won the Democratic primary for governor. He'll face off against Republican businessman John Cox, who's backed by President Trump in November's gubernatorial race in California. This is Gavin Newsom speaking on Tuesday night.
We're engaged in an epic battle, and it looks like voters will have a real choice this November between a governor who's going to stand up to Donald Trump and a foot soldier in his war on California.
Democratic California Senator Dianne Feinstein won her primary race, though it remains unclear who she'll face in November's general election. Tuesday was a big night for female candidates in New Mexico. Former Democratic State Party leader Deb Haaland won her congressional Democratic primary, putting her on track to become the first Native American congresswoman in U.S. history. She's an enrolled member of the Pueblo of Laguna and is running on a pro-immigration platform opposing Trump's border wall and advocating for the abolition of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. This is Deb Haaland speaking Tuesday night.
Our win is a victory for working people, a victory for women, a victory for Indian country. By the billionaire class.
Other women candidates who won Tuesday night include Iowa Democrats Cindy Axne and Abby Finkenauer. Iowa has never before sent a woman to the House of Representatives. In South Dakota, Congresswoman Kristi Noem won the Republican gubernatorial primary, making her likely to become South Dakota's first female governor. Meanwhile, in Alabama, Republican Congresswoman Martha Roby was forced into a runoff to save her seat after she took political heat for refusing to endorse President Trump when the Access Hollywood tape surfaced, saying, "I cannot look my children in the eye and justify a vote for a man who promotes and boasts about sexually assaulting women," unquote. She'll now face a July runoff against former Democratic Congressmember Bobby Bright, who's now running as a Republican and has attacked Roby for not endorsing Trump during the 2016 election. EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt is again facing controversy over a slew of new political scandals. The Washington Post reports Pruitt had his former scheduler contact the chief executive of Chick-fil-A, seeking to set up a personal meeting about the possibility of Pruitt's wife, Marilyn, opening a franchise of the fast food chain. The revelation is based on emails obtained by a Freedom of Information Act request filed by the Sierra Club. Meanwhile, the New York Times reports Pruitt attended a university University of Kentucky basketball game last December in seats belonging to Joseph W. Kraft, the billionaire coal executive who's aggressively fighting to reverse Obama-era rules limiting coal pollution. Pruitt is also facing criticism after congressional transcripts surfaced showing he had one of his aides go apartment hunting for him in violation of federal ethics standards that prohibit personal assistance by a subordinate. The aide was also instructed to try to get Pruitt a used mattress from the Trump International Hotel for Pruitt. Interestingly, back in 2015, the mattress company Serta dumped Trump's mattress line when Trump first announced his presidential race by calling Mexicans rapists. The United Nations has slammed the United States for its practice of separating migrant children from their parents at the border, saying the practice violates international law. This is Ravina Shamdasani of the United Nations Office for Human Rights.
The U.S. should immediately halt this practice of separating families and stop criminalizing what should at most be an administrative offense, that of irregular entry and stay in the U.S. There is nothing normal about detaining children. As I said, detention is never in the best interest of the child and always constitutes a child rights violation. On this being a criminal offense, as I said, entry into a country without the right papers should at most be an administrative offense, and it certainly does not warrant jailing children.
Federal authorities reportedly separated at least 600 immigrant children from their parents last month, sparking widespread outrage and international condemnation. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE, raided a gardening and landscaping company in Ohio and detained 114 undocumented immigrants Tuesday. The workers at Corso's Flower and Garden Center are expected to face criminal charges, including identity theft and tax evasion. And in more immigration news, 9 people were arrested in Seattle on Tuesday at a protest demanding billionaire developer Martin Selig stop leasing to ICE, Border Patrol, and the Seattle Immigration Court. The protesters with the group Northwest Detention Center Resistance locked themselves together and blockaded traffic outside one of his buildings for nearly 2 hours. The White House has announced President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will meet at the 5-star Capella Hotel on Singapore's Sentosa Island for their proposed June 12th summit. The location's announcement Tuesday comes after President Trump said Friday he would hold the summit after canceling the meeting only a week before. President Trump hosted a patriotism event at the White House Tuesday after abruptly canceling the White House visit of the Super Bowl-winning Philadelphia Eagles. Tuesday's ceremony closed with a rendition of God Bless America, but video of the performance showed Trump did not know all the words. Tuesday's event was hastily planned after Trump canceled the Eagles' visit on Monday night, tweeting, "Staying in the locker room for the playing of our national anthem is as disrespectful as to our country as kneeling. Sorry," unquote. Not a single Eagles player kneeled during the national anthem in the 2017 season. Meanwhile, LeBron James of the Cleveland Cavaliers and Steph Curry of the Golden State Warriors have both stated that they will not accept an invitation to the White House should their teams win the ongoing NBA playoffs. In India, millions of farmers are in the middle of a 10-day strike to demand debt relief and higher prices for their produce. The strike, launched on June 1st, has caused vegetable prices to jump as much as 10% in major Indian cities as the farmers withhold their produce from markets. The ongoing protest spans 8 states across India, most of which are ruled by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP party. It follows a similar strike last year, during which police shot and killed 5 striking farmers in the central state of Madhya Pradesh exactly a year ago today. In Saudi Arabia, 10 women were granted driver's licenses Monday, just 2 weeks before the Saudi government's finally slated to lift the ban on women driving nationwide. But some of the activists who fought to lift the ban remain in prison after the Saudi government arrested at least 6 of the country's most prominent feminist activists last month. In Guatemala, hundreds of people remain missing after the volcanic eruption 25 miles southwest of the capital, Guatemala City, has buried whole villages in lava. The eruption of the Fuego volcano, which means fire, has killed at least 75 people so far, with officials warning the death toll is expected to continue rising. In a victory for gay rights, the European Union's highest court has ruled all 28 member countries of the European Union must recognize same-sex marriages and questions of residency rights and afford foreign spouses of EU citizens the right to live and work in the European Union. The plaintiff in the case, Adrian Komen, a Romanian married to an American man, said after the ruling, "We can now look in the eyes of any public official in Romania and across the EU with the certainty that our relationship is equally valuable and equally relevant for the purpose of free movement within the EU." In New York City, an annual real estate conference faced protests Tuesday over the attendance of private prison companies. Geo Group and Core Civic converted in 2013 to real estate investment trusts, or RETs, to avoid paying corporate taxes. The Republican tax plan also offers a 25% tax cut on investments in prisons. This is Daniel Carrillo with Enlace.
There's correlation between this lobby and the increase in arrests, in criminalization, in detention, and incarceration. And we want to break that cycle.
Meanwhile, also in New York City, a growing number of residents and community groups are calling on the city of New York to create its own public bank to divest from Wall Street banks that are financing fossil fuel extraction and private prison companies. The Miss America organization, which runs the Miss America pageant, says the competition will no longer judge contestants based on their physical looks and will no longer include the swimsuit portion of the event. In December, the entire leadership of the Miss America organization was forced to resign after the Huffington Post published a series of emails in which the organization's CEO and its employees referred to the women contestants as the C word and malcontents, called former winner Gretchen Carlson a snake, and shamed another former winner about her weight gain. In California, Judge Aaron Persky was recalled from office Tuesday, 2 years after he sparked national outrage for sentencing Stanford University swimmer Brock Turner to a 6-month prison term for sexually assaulting an unconscious woman behind a dumpster. Turner was caught by 2 witnesses thrusting on top of the victim as she lay unconscious behind a dumpster. But Judge Persky said he was concerned a longer term would have a serious impact on Turner, who is a white champion swimmer at Stanford. Judge Persky later gave a harsher sentence to a Latino man who committed a similar crime. It's the first time since 1932 that California voters have chosen to recall a sitting judge. To see our full coverage of the Brock Turner case, go to DemocracyNow.org. Minnesota Congressmember Keith Ellison's announced he's running for Attorney General in Minnesota. Ellison is the first Muslim elected to Congress in the United States. He also serves as deputy chair of the Democratic National Committee. And legendary artist and musician Jalal Mansour Nuruddin, known to many as the grandfather of rap, has died at the age of 73. Nuruddin co-founded the spoken word group The Last Poets in 1968, soon establishing the group as a fixture of the civil rights movement. Nuruddin was an inspiration for Miles Davis, Jimi Hendrix, Tupac Shakur, and others. This is Jalal Mansour Nuruddin performing White Man's Got a God Complex.
I done paid enough rent for this pad to be mine, but you just wanna cheat me cause I ain't your kind. Damn, can't you see the place is falling down? No, you can't dig it cause you ain't never around. Damn, I'm so poor, I don't know what in the hell I'ma do anymore. Not from this day to the next, cause the white man's got a God complex.
Jalal Mansour Nuruddin of The Last Poets has died at the age of 73. This is Democracy Now! These are the headlines, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Hurricane season is officially underway, and today we spend the hour looking at Puerto Rico as it continues to recover from Hurricane Maria, which devastated the island last September. Researchers at Harvard University recently revealed the death toll from Hurricane Maria may be a staggering 70 times higher than the official count. The official death toll still stands at 64, but the new study estimates a death toll of at least 4,645, with some projections topping 5,700. This is one of the report's co-authors, Dr. Domingo Marquez of Carlo Albizu University.
4,645. So to add something, I'll tell you that in our study, we found that in terms of the people who suffered from the hurricane was due to the fact that the average Puerto Rican was exposed to 84 days without electric power. Moreover, it was more than 60 days without drinking water, which is a huge public health problem, and it was more than 40 days for the average person without cellular communications. So just those three things really give reasons to the mortality numbers. 911 wasn't only not working in small towns, it was down in all of Puerto Rico. So when you think about those things, you can understand why the number was so high.
President Trump has so far not responded to the new study, but in October, during a visit to Puerto Rico, Trump boasted about the low official death count.
Now, I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack, because we've spent a lot of money on Puerto Rico, and that's fine. We've saved a lot of lives. If you look at the, every death is a horror, but if you look at a real catastrophe like Katrina, and you look at the tremendous hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that died, and you look at what happened here with really a storm that was just totally overpowering. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. What is your death count as of this moment? 17?
16 certified.
16 people certified. 16 people versus in the thousands. You can be very proud of all of your people, all of our people working together. 16 versus literally thousands of people.
That was President Trump in the days after Hurricane Maria. That was the same visit where he tossed paper towels to some of the residents of San Juan. Cable news networks are facing criticism for spending far more time covering the Roseanne story than the stunning new Harvard report that found at least 4,645 people died in Puerto Rico because of the hurricane. According to Media Matters, the main cable news networks covered Roseanne for over 10 hours in the first day of coverage. They covered Hurricane Maria's death toll in Puerto Rico for just over 30 minutes. Fox News spent just 48 seconds covering the Puerto Rico story. San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz posted a message on Twitter reading, "Never forgotten, never again." In an attached photo, she was wearing a hat with the number 4,645.
For more, we host a roundtable discussion for the hour. We're joined by Naomi Klein, author, journalist, senior correspondent for The Intercept. She has a new book out. It's called The Battle for Paradise. Puerto Rico takes on the disaster capitalists. She's also author of No Is Not Enough, Resisting Trump's Shock Politics and Winning the World We Need. This changes everything: capitalism versus the climate and the shock doctrine, the rise of disaster capitalism, among others. Also joining us straight from Puerto Rico, Katia Aviles Vasquez, a Puerto Rican environmental activist, member of a sustainable farming resource group called the Boricua Organization for Ecological Agriculture, part of the Climate Justice Alliance. She's based in San Juan. And Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, executive director of Uprose and co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! You have just come, Katia, from the island. You were there when this Harvard study came out. It's not that a lot of people on the island weren't saying it's actually the opposite of what Trump said at the time. He's consulting the governor, and he said, 16, 17 people have died. That was right after. But now this number, maybe it's 4,600, maybe it's 5,700 people who have died. Was that your sense of things? And what, as we move into this next hurricane season, are your major concerns right now?
So I think the first thing is to highlight Omaya Sosa and the Center for Investigative Journalism. They were the first ones to document and call out what we all were feeling and knew and had seen, which was that we had died in the thousands. And I think it's really important to highlight their work, and particularly they were able to gain a victory yesterday to have access to the number of deaths thanks to Squire Luis Jose Torres Asensio, among other people that were in the team. The 46-45 number is a statistical mean.
Excuse me, when you say that they were able to gain access, that was a judge ordering the government of Puerto Rico to finally release
the numbers, finally.
The death certificates, actually.
That came down yesterday. Yep. So after come in June. Yes. And the numbers, we knew that it was going to be in the thousands. And I think it's important to not focus on whether it's 4645 or 5700, because we knew it was going to be on the thousands. The study remains within a 3-month window, which is September, October, November, December. And it looks specifically at the survey that they were doing, and then they extrapolate based on that survey. But it doesn't necessarily count all the people that went out of time, for example, all of our elderly and sick that maybe could have lasted, our knowledge bearers that could have lasted a little bit longer and suffered before they finally, their bodies gave up because they couldn't take the heat or the lack of food. I think it's important to that highlights not only that it was kept secret, but the fact that it was kept secret to serve a political agenda. In the case of Governor Rosselló, that day, right after Trump left, the government recognized that the number went up to 34. So when he answered Trump's question, it's very unlikely that he didn't know the number was not 16 already. So that, again, it's just highlighting that the numbers and the entire situation has been usurped to serve Rosselló's political agenda and the capitalists that are now taking over the island. I think the other part that needs to be taken into consideration, like you mentioned, is that the number of deaths now since January has continued to increase due to Maria. And we have not only the suicide rates that are increasing, but stoplights literally falling on people and killing them, power plants blowing up and catching fire and killing people, and then people that have continued to die because of the lack of the necessary and appropriate resources. So if we actually take into account all those indirect deaths, again, we're in the thousands of deaths. And coming into the next hurricane season, infrastructure is still very weakened. Houses are still with tarps. There's a lot of debris on the streets. The water hasn't been restored everywhere. Electricity hasn't been restored everywhere. The boat system, La Lancha, that goes from the main island to Vieques and Culebra is still not functioning properly. So we're in a very weakened state to face the new hurricane season.
I wanted to go back to that issue. The Harvard study only, as you mentioned, goes from September 20th to December 31st. Yet there were hundreds of thousands of people in January and February that still didn't have electricity. And so that there were undoubtedly other deaths that occurred in the early part of this year as well.
Correct. And there's still some that happened a couple of weeks ago because indirectly because of that. Like I mentioned, literally a stoplight fell, and the person that it hit recently died. So we've had continuous deaths due indirectly to the hurricane and its impact on infrastructure.
Naomi, I wanted to ask you about, you first did an article, a long article, and now this book in terms of what you saw when you went down to Puerto Rico, and also how much Puerto Rico has fit into one of your main theses that you've developed over the years of disaster capitalism.
Well, I was actually there with Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, and we were lucky enough to be shown around to some parts of the country by Katia. And, we saw people in February having to travel very long ways to plug in their oxygen machines, elderly people, because they still didn't have electricity. So I think that this goes to the point that the deaths were continuing after the count stopped for this particular study. And I'm really struck by this, this phrase that these are deaths due to Hurricane Maria. It's not due to Hurricane Maria. Maria was the catalyst. But if you look at the study, the cause of death in so many of the cases, and the largest cause was the collapse of the healthcare system, which is intimately tied to the collapse of the electricity system, which is intimately tied to the collapse of the water system. So this is really about total infrastructure failure, right? And it didn't just fail. A total society doesn't have its infrastructure fail unless you systematically knock out every support structure, and you do so knowingly. I keep thinking about this phrase from 4 decades ago by the great late investigative journalist Rodolfo Walsh, the Argentinian kind of inventor of investigative journalism in so many ways. When he was describing the economic policies of Argentina's military junta, he called it planned misery. And I think that applies so much to what is going on in Puerto Rico right now, that this has been a planned system of immiseration. Maria comes along and is just the final blow. But you know, I keep searching for a phrase to describe this. It's not a natural disaster. It's not just a tragedy. It's state-sponsored mass killing. That's what we're talking about here. Because maybe there wasn't the intent to kill, but there was the knowledge that this was that the infrastructure was being destroyed, and even after we see the results, the deadly results of it, they're doing it still. And you know, this comes to what, Juan, you're asking me about, how this fits into what I've written in the past about disaster capitalism and the shock doctrine. Even after seeing the effects of such brutal austerity and the thousands of lives it has taken, what is the response? More of the same. Huge doses of austerity that they're pushing right now, trying to close hundreds of schools, more layoffs, more neglect. And the cost of this is counted in thousands and thousands of lives.
I wanted to go to the White House press briefing Tuesday. Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked about Puerto Rico.
Does the president still think his response to the hurricane in Puerto Rico deserves a 10 out of 10 score, now that estimates say almost 5,000 people died there?
The federal response, once again, was at a historic proportion. We're continuing to work with the people of Puerto Rico and do the best we can to provide federal assistance, particularly working with the governor there in Puerto Rico, and we'll continue to do so.
Peter, any concern about the massive volume of the death toll there?
So there are the reporters asking about the volume of the death toll. The White House spokesperson saying, doing the best we can. Elizabeth Jean-Pierre.
Well, what we understand is that FEMA is evacuating people instead of rebuilding. We know that even before the hurricane, that lots of people were being pushed out of Puerto Rico, so many of them moving to Central Florida. We estimate that by 2020, I think something like 600,000 Puerto Ricos will have been pushed out of the island. We know that here in New York City, those people who are in temporary shelters are also faced with eviction. They're living under the worst kind of circumstances. They get frisked when they get in to their homes. They have to show their ID as if they were in some form of incarceration. And I think that one of the things that concerns us the most is that this effort of evacuating the island is really an opportunity to really privatize the entire island. And so if there are no people there, it really makes it easier for the United States to support corporate interests. One of the things that I've been concerned about is what happens, for example, with those 23 super funds that exist in Puerto Rico, and a lot of the toxic exposure that people are being exposed to. None of that is being addressed by the U.S. government. Those are U.S. corporate interests, and those are sites that are managed by U.S. corporations, and that's another source of death for people in Puerto Rico. So it's really disappointing. But I also think that there's not a lot that is being expected of the U.S. government in this situation. We saw what happened in New Orleans, and we saw how people were treated in New Orleans, and people in Puerto Rico have not fared better than that.
We're going to go to break. When we come back, we're going to take a little of the trip with you that Naomi Klein and Elizabeth Jean-Pierre went on in Puerto Rico when they followed you, Katya, and others. We're talking to Naomi Klein. This is The Day, the book, The Battle for Paradise. Puerto Rico takes on the disaster capitalist is released with a big event tonight at Cooper Union. Elizabeth Jean-Pierre is with us. She is co-chair of Climate Justice Action, among other groups. And Katya Aviles is with us. Katya Aviles is a well-known Puerto Rican environmentalist working in agriculture with the group Boricua Ecological Agriculture. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
La lluvia cae, el río nos guía. La lluvia cae, el río nos guía. La lluvia cae, el río nos guía.
Resilience, a new song by the Puerto Rican artist Taina Asili. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Juan?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up, Elizabeth. Before the break, you were talking about the federal response. And one of the things that folks have not gotten paid much attention to is that the Trump's Federal Communications Commission recently decided that they were going to sharply reduce the Lifeline project, which most people are not aware of. But the Lifeline project is a project that provides cell phone and broadband services to low-income Americans. And there are 500,000 people in Puerto Rico who receive that Lifeline. It's a government subsidy for communications. Now, we all talk about the communications catastrophe that occurred in Puerto Rico, but 369,000 people in Puerto Rico are going to lose. There's 500,000 in Puerto Rico who received this service. 369,000 are going to be cut off as a result of this decision. And they're not going to have access to even government-subsidized communications in an emergency situation like this. Another example of how, in many different ways, the federal government is failing the people of Puerto Rico.
You know, what's really interesting is that we're living in the age of climate change, and everyone who is talking about climate adaptation, resiliency, building social cohesion, one of the central things to making it possible for people to survive recurrent extreme weather events is a good communication system. And so we just finished hearing about a report where people lost their lives because they had no access to communication. They couldn't get access to health care. They couldn't get access to, if they had diabetes and they needed medical care. And so by doing that, by dismantling that and by diminishing that, it really increases the chances that more people are going to die. It increases vulnerability. It destroys social cohesion. And it really is an attack on the survivability of the Puerto Rican people. And I think people think of communications and they don't see the relationship between the ability for people to have access to all of their needs through that system and their survival. And there really is a direct relationship. And that's just one of the many things that is happening in Puerto Rico to really make it impossible for people to make it through.
Let's turn for a moment to an excerpt of The Battle for Paradise, a new short documentary by Naomi Klein and The Intercept.
Tonight, Maria's direct hit, devastating Puerto Rico.
The biggest catastrophe in Puerto Rican history.
Evacuate or die.
Puerto Rico es una zona de desastre.
Desastre natural.
Desastre. I've been reporting on large-scale disasters for 2 decades. Superstorms, wars, economic meltdowns. My focus is less on the fact of these shocks than on how they are so often exploited. How governments, corporations, and investors have learned to take advantage of the desperation and distraction in the aftermath of these events to push through radical policies, privatization, deregulation, and austerity laws that remake societies in the interests of a tiny elite. I saw it happen in Iraq after the U.S. invasion, when the country was treated as a blank canvas for libertarian fantasies, and again in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, when the storm became the excuse to rapidly shut down public schools and public housing and replace them with more profitable alternatives. Even before Hurricane Maria made landfall in September of 2017, many Puerto Ricans worried about another episode of this long story, about how the storm could be used to attack their austerity-starved public services and to snap up damaged beachfront property on the cheap.
As you can imagine, we were all taken by surprise.
Margaret Peña-Huvelier of Sotheby's.
At the magnitude of this storm. Initially, in those first couple of days, we felt that perhaps this whole business would be wiped out. I can speak to the luxury side, and surprisingly enough, we did not see any loss of interest in the marketplace.
Welcome to Dorado Beaches. We have here a double high ceiling in the living room.
Let's see the garden, because the magic of this house is the garden. You see there's a level of sophistication, yet Caribbean flair.
So are you hearing from people who think they can get a good deal in Puerto Rico because of the hurricane?
Absolutely, everybody. We call it pre-Maria, post-Maria.
There's been a lot of talk about disaster capitalism here in Puerto Rico and in many places in the world that have been hit by disasters in recent years. What makes Puerto Rico different?
This is Rutgers University.
One of the particularities of Puerto Rico is that this major historic storm occurs on top of an already existing major historic economic crisis. People were already in a kind of state of shock, and severe economic policies were already being applied.
So what are the ways that a crisis like this can be profitable?
As you know, as you've written about, in these moments, a lot of things are suspended, expectations are changed, and so laws can be passed and things can be put into place that would have otherwise not been acceptable. And I think right now the main thing that was already on the horizon is going to be the privatization of public services. So some speculate that part of why the electricity company has been so slow in getting back up is that they're preparing for privatization of all of it. Things also like public transportation system, all of those services that were already weakened, had already been disinvested from by the government because of the financial crisis. It's to be expected that all of them are probably going to be sold, and they'll probably be sold at a very low price because now they can say, oh, because of Maria, everything is devastated, everything is broken.
It has been the most devastating natural disaster over the last 100 years.
Puerto Rico's Commerce Secretary Manuel Lavoy.
Infrastructure suffered, telecommunications suffered. Now, I believe that can be seen as a silver lining opportunity.
Deseo informarte.
I wish to inform you of one of the highest impact initiatives for building a new and modern Puerto Rico, the transformation of our energy system.
Governor Rocio.
Over the next few days, a process will begin where PREPA's assets will be sold to the companies that will transform the power generation system into a modern, efficient, and less costly system for our people.
I met with the governor just after the hurricane.
This is the CEO of Isla Verde Hotel Group, Keith called
And I
St.
said, I'm going to double down, I'm going to treble down, I'm going to quadruple down, because I believe in Puerto Rico. This is Isla Verde Beach, and to me, this is the finest urban beach in the Western Hemisphere. This is the new pool that we're putting in. We're building a new beach bar and restaurant. You'll see next door there's a new hotel. There'll be another new hotel on the point. Really, what the government is doing and has the chance to do is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to repair and rebuild the infrastructure of the island. And if the infrastructure is built well, if the electricity, the roads, the water is taken to 21st century levels, that can only help us all.
The big question hanging over the reconstruction is this: who is Puerto Rico for? Is it for Puerto Ricans, or is it for outside investors and tourists? And after a collective trauma like Hurricane Maria, who has the right to make these fateful decisions? Because many Puerto Ricans have their own ideas about how to replace their shattered infrastructure. And it isn't about selling it off for profit. It's about reimagining how the island generates energy, feeds itself, teaches its kids, and heals its sick. A people's recovery. And like the shock doctrine, it was already underway before Maria.
This is Casa Pueblo's Arturo
Masol. A community-based organization with 38 years of history defending our national territory. We have a commitment towards sustainable development. Solar power is our first and sole energy source. We were just a few in 1999 when we started with solar power. And all of a sudden, Casa Pueblo, after the hurricane, was still running.
Hello.
So people came here right after the hurricane to recharge their equipment. People came here with their equipment for respiratory therapy. This was an energy oasis for the community. Immediately after the hurricane, we distributed over 10,000 solar lamps to improve quality of life for the people. Now we have houses asking us for support, and we want to help people unplug from the grid, from fossil fuel. We should embrace a transition to clean energy sources. Solar is one. We have plenty of wind, we have water power, we have plenty of biomass that can be used as a source of energy to run our country. And I think Casa Pueblo, what we're doing is not waiting for the government, not waiting for the US Congress. There's a resistance from everywhere. So we're gonna do whatever is at reach to change that landscape and to tell the people of Puerto Rico that a different future is possible.
Welcome to our farm. Here we are in Orocovis, that's the center of the island. It's beautiful work.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
It is.
And it's green.
It's green, yeah.
We'd heard that there had been so much damage to the forest, but 4 months later...
Well, it was like a fire had passed. But now we're in shape.
And that last speaker, Farm School Director Delma Cartagena. From the documentary, The Battle for Paradise, a short doc by The Intercept, featuring our guest, Naomi Klein. It was directed by Lauren Feeney. Naomi, the author of the new book, The Battle for Paradise, Puerto Rico Takes on the Disaster Capitalists. It's out today. She's launching it at Cooper Union, along with our other guests, who will rejoin in a moment.
Cops will be crushed by the trains after losing their guns, and blood will run through the streets of Harlem, drowning anything without substance when the revolution comes. When the revolution comes. When the revolution comes. When the revolution comes. I hope pearly white teeth fall off the mouths that speak of revolution without reference. The course of revolution is 360 degrees. Understand the cycle that never ends. Understand the beginning to be the end, and nothing is in between but space and time that I make or you make to relate or not to relate to the world outside my mind, your mind. Speak not of revolution until you are willing to eat rats to survive. When the revolution comes. Revolution is south. When the revolution comes. When the revolution comes, guns and rifles will be taking the place of poems and essays. Black cultural centers will be fought, supplying the revolutionaries with food and arms when the revolution comes. When the revolution comes, white death will fall off the walls of museums and churches, breaking the lie that enslaved our mothers. When the revolution comes.
When the Revolution Comes by The Last Poets. Co-founder Jalal Mansour Nuruddin, known to many as the grandfather of rap, has died at the age of 73. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest for this hour, Naomi Klein, author of the new book, The Battle for Paradise, Puerto Rico Takes on the Disaster Capitalists, launching the new book at Cooper Union, along with all of our guests and co-host Juan Gonzalez. Puerto Rican environmental activist Katia Aviles Vasquez, she's just up from San Juan, and Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, executive director of Uprose and co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance. Juan?
I wanted to ask Naomi, one of the things that you mentioned in the documentary was who is the Puerto Rico for? And one of the amazing things that's occurred largely as a result of Maria as well, is the foreclosure rate of housing in Puerto Rico. There's 55,000 people who are in foreclosures in Puerto Rico right now. An average of 14 families a day are into the foreclosure process. And this enormous change in property ownership that's occurring on the island, again, fueled by the Maria disaster.
Well, I think this goes to Elizabeth's point about how efficiently people are being moved off island, right? And such basic things aren't being done to keep people there, right? And like being able to stay in your home or being able to send your kids to school. In fact, the opposite is happening. People are being evicted from their homes. They don't need to be. And their schools that are
evicted from some of their darkened homes.
Yeah, and also not darkened homes, right? And schools that parents and teachers have come together to repair are not being allowed to reopen, right? So the reason why people are being forced off the island is because they have to send their kids to school. They have to find housing. And as we saw in that clip from the documentary, there's a boom going on in luxury housing. There's all kinds of land grabs taking place. The prices aren't collapsing for that, but they had collapsed before, so there are all kinds of bargains available. And this is what we mean by disaster capitalism and the exacerbation of the very forces that turned this disaster into this massive human catastrophe.
And you mentioned this before when your piece came out, The Battle for Paradise, but the Bitcoin, the blockchain entrepreneurs that see Puerto Rico as their playground, as this is the future. Elizabeth Jean-Pierre.
You know, Puerto Rico's always been seen as the recreational center, as an opportunity for the most privileged. It's been exploited for so many years. It's not new. It's just extreme now. And so we're seeing that people are descending on the island. Even folks from the diaspora who have wanted to buy property in Puerto Rico are being stopped from doing that, even when they bring cash. It's almost like they're putting it all on lockdown so that they can put it on sale for another kind of buyer. And so the combination of the foreclosures, which is super important, I'm so happy you brought that up, because literally there is no suspension of regulations and rules in the case of an extreme weather event to make it possible to ensure people's livability and to make sure that people can stay in their communities. And that, combined with everything else, is really designed just to push people out. Remember, we're the descendants of what's called excess population, right? This happened generations ago to our grandparents when they came here. That was to create opportunity for U.S. economic industry, to put in petrochemical industries, to wipe out the agricultural sector. That was done before. And now it's happening more on a grander scale. And so I think all of these things are absolutely related. And the idea really is that we're going to be displaced. We saw it happen in New Orleans, where people were pushed out of New Orleans, African-American communities that were there since slavery. And now what you see is white communities and environmental and transportation amenities that should have been serving historical black communities are not there for them now. And those communities have been spread all over the place. So I think the same thing is happening in Puerto Rico, but at a larger scale.
And Katya, I wanted to ask you in terms of the hope and the resistance of the population, and especially around issues of sustainable development and power. What have you seen on the ground in terms of how people have been mobilized to find solutions for themselves?
Well, before I go into that, I wanted to highlight that the eviction notices have gone to farmers too, right after the hurricanes. Mm-hmm. And just at the moment when they were the weakest, a whole bunch of farmers received their eviction notice to leave their farms. So it's been going on. We've had almost all of the land in Puerto Rico is at a threat since Promesa. And now since the hurricane, it's kind of like a fire sale, right? So what we've been doing is that one of the main things is trying to get back up. So if we're losing land, we're losing homes, then we need to take land and take homes. So one of the things that is occurring is people joining collectively to occupy spaces. And there's a couple of spaces that have been occupied. There's a group of families that took over a shut down school and have been actually retrofitting it so that they can turn it into housing. That's one of the most beautiful examples. But different grassroots groups got together to support each other. And I think that's the reason that the death count is not higher than it is. It's precisely because people got together to help each other. We brought each other food and water.
You mentioned schools. I just want to go to one more clip of the Intercept documentary, The Battle for Paradise. The president of the Teachers Federation of Puerto Rico, Mercedes Martinez, speaking about the Secretary of Education's approach to rebuilding Puerto Rico's schools after Hurricane Maria.
You would imagine a secretary having some kind of sensibility towards our population and saying, let's open the schools, let's comfort their children, let's bring the teachers back, let's get them to talk to the peers. But that's not what happened. Immediately after the hurricane, the first thing she says is, this hurricane gives me the perfect opportunity to do the reform that I wanted to do that was not able to. We learned from the experience of Katrina what she was talking about.
That's Mercedes Martinez, president of the Teachers Federation of Puerto Rico. Katya.
So in addition to housing, there's also been brigades going out to all of the different farms within the islands, Puerto Rico being an archipelago, and supporting the farmers. I mean, it emotionally has a toll, not only physically, to see the work that you've been working on for years disappear overnight. So having that emotional support, bringing filters and trying to get people, like Masol said on the mini documentary, getting people off the grid and taking advantage of our most important resource, which is the sun. The other one is that these grassroots groups that have been popping up and that are supporting each other and are there are then also tying together, linking with each other. And there's a couple of initiatives that have come post Maria, like Junta Gente, that got together in Mariana, which is another area just like at Juntas that has a long history of struggle and social organization. And Junta Gente is one of the things it's working on, is getting together, linking all of these groups that are resisting, that are facing these capitalists.
And Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you about the response of the diaspora in the United States. Clearly, this is not only the beginning of hurricane season, but the annual Puerto Rican Day Parade is coming up this Sunday. And everyone remembers the controversy last year when all the corporate sponsors pulled out because the parade was having Oscar Lopez Rivera, the freed political prisoner, marching in the parade. This year, what do you expect happening at the parade, and also in general, the response of Puerto Ricans in the United States to what's happening on the island?
Well, thank you for that question, because what we're doing is very much related to what Katia just raised, which is that as part of our Power PR, which is a national initiative that was launched October 11th by the Climate Justice Alliance and a lot of our organizations, including Organización Boricua, we sent 5 brigades to Puerto Rico, and in New York City, we created our Power PR NYC, which is a Puerto Rican diaspora response to sustain engagement in Puerto Rico for the long term. We knew immediately that there would be disaster, but we also knew there was more disaster coming, and everybody was really focusing on what was immediate, and we were really invested in the long term. So we've done a number of actions, both direct actions, rallies, protests. We've had town hall meetings. And then for the Puerto Rican Day Parade, I think we were really disappointed that we wanted to have a meeting with the board of directors, because we felt that, unlike other years, that this parade needed to be a direct action. The entire parade really needed to be raise attention on a national scale on everything that was happening in Puerto Rico. It's one of those parades that gets national attention, and we didn't think it was time for celebration. They told us that they would be honoring one town like they always do, and it felt like a Miss America contest. And I said we really needed to focus on 78 municipalities, that it wasn't enough to do one, and that we really needed to tell the local narrative of what was happening in every town in Puerto Rico. So our Power PR NYC will be in the parade, and we will be telling the story of colonialism. We will be telling the story of disaster capitalism. We will be bringing in activists and people from communities from all 5 boroughs, including Suffolk County and some people in New Jersey and Connecticut. And our contingent will deliver that message. But in terms of Puerto Rico, we are concerned about the debt. We're concerned about austerity. We're concerned about promesa. Meetings that are not had in Puerto Rico about Puerto Rico have had in New York City and Wall Street. And so we see that as our responsibility to step up on behalf of our people on the island.
You've got a partnership between colonialism and privatization. Naomi Klein, you write a lot about this when you talk about disaster capitalists, like, for example, of the healthcare system and where it's headed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think an important point about the numbers around the death toll, and so much of it being the result of a collapsed healthcare system, is, we hear from the governor that, everything will be fixed with privatization. This is the line, right? It'll be modern, it'll be efficient. All the problems are due to the system being public. This is a big narrative. But in fact, the healthcare system was already splintered and privatized and chopped up, and they've done it with healthcare what they want to do with electricity, what they want to do with transportation in so many ways. And the last thing that we could say is that it's been efficient and modern or effective in any way. One thing you mentioned, Junta Gente, the book that has come out is 100% a fundraiser for this remarkable network of more than 60 Puerto Rican groups. And I want to thank my publisher, Haymarket, for getting this out so quickly, for doing it as 100% fundraiser, the full advance, all the royalties going to Puerto Rico. So if people are interested...
Junta Gente in English means...
the people together, right? And what it is a direct response to this predatory system that is descended on the island to exploit the disaster. And the reason why this strategy is used is because, these investors know that when people are in that state of emergency that is ongoing, it's very hard to engage in political action, to organize. And the most inspiring thing that I saw in Puerto Rico, which frankly sets it apart from so many disaster zones is that deep level of political organization that predates the storm that allowed people to respond even when the lights were still out, to come together in these remarkable ways and to start developing a people's platform, not just saying no to disaster capitalism, doing that. We've seen huge protests on May Day, facing enormous repression and resistance, but also saying we don't want that, but we do want this. We have a vision, and that is what Katya's work is all about with the food system. So, we've touched on a lot of things, but I really want to encourage people, if they're in New York, to come to Cooper Union tonight and hear more from Elizabeth and Katya. We're also going to have a representative from the Teachers Union, and just to find out more about this and to support the groups in Puerto Rico who are putting forward.
And Juan,
of course, Juan.
And Juan, one of the issues that you speak about so much in talking about Puerto Rico, this issue, of course, of colonialism, of the debt, of the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico.
And also the reality that this, as you were saying, the infrastructure was so weakened for so many years that when the hurricane hit, it made it worse. There was just a recent General Accounting Office report that came out, the GAO report that looked at the financial crisis in Puerto Rico, and it examined 20 of the biggest bond issues that were issued by Puerto Rico and found that 16 of them were just used to refinance debt. They were issuing debt to pay debt, and the Wall Street firms had to know that this is not kosher. This is not the way you do bonding and capital expenditures. So the Wall Street firms very well knew that Puerto Rico did not have the ability to continue issuing this debt, but they underwrote it because they were making big fees, and they figured that the day of reckoning would come way after that government had left office and the particular financial officials from these banks that issued the debt after they were gone. So this was a constant problem that we've had in terms of the colonial relationship with Puerto Rico, that this off the books operation in Puerto Rico was allowed to continue to function for so long.
And Katya, your challenging of monoculture in Puerto Rico and what a diversified agricultural system would look like brought especially into focus when you saw what happened with the hurricane and what people needed afterwards.
Correct. It was just a sin to see so many farmers suffering when you have land to grow in the sun, because the way that we farm was assimilated or was turned around by the U.S. government to serve the purposes. So one of the things is that we need to sell chemical products, and we need to make sure that we have Puerto Ricans as consumers. And it's actually been part of U.S. policy to have the Caribbean as a consuming appendage so that they can sell more, particularly food. So breadfruit was substituted for potatoes, intercropping systems for monocultures. And what that led to was to having not only starving farmers, but we saw so many moms giving just water to their babies, which can be deadly, not only for many reasons, right? But then at the same time that farmers had to throw away thousands of gallons of milk because there was nowhere to pasteurize them because the plants were shut down. And this happened all the way into February and March. So the impact of having a monoculture system and a focus on scale was huge for our farmers. However, the counterpoint to that was precisely that the agroecological farmers, those that had intercropping still, were able to feed their families, were able to actually link with the community centers nearby and to provide food for the collective lunch preparation process. The other thing that happened there was also that the markets, where the agroecological markets, could step up almost immediately to start connecting with people, and it became a hub for support. So maybe not that many greens were on the table, but seeing the farmer and seeing your customer was very important for people to heal.
Well, I want to thank you all for being with us. Puerto Rican environmental activist Katya Aviles Vasquez, Naomi Klein, author of the new book, The Battle for Paradise, Puerto Rico Takes on the Disaster Capitalists, and Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, executive director of UPRO's, co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance. They're all speaking tonight, along with Juan Gonzalez, at Cooper Union in downtown Manhattan on the publication of the book. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Accepting applications for our paid video production fellowships. Check it out at democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feldstein, and Guz Dur, Nermeen Sheikh. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.